I believe that we're all an audience of allies, right? Kindred spirits really driving this work of DEI. And I think as we collectively continue integrating DEI into our workplace, into our work cultures, we're faced with proving sustainable impact. And so today we get to hear from two DEI experts who they're going to assure us that we're not alone in this work, which is pretty great. But also they're going to share with us what motivates them and what inspires them to keep driving forward, keep moving forward in this work. And so I believe that the benefit will ideally be for all of us is that we'll leave feeling reinvigorated, but also we'll leave with some newly created connections and that we'll be able to carry forward as we continue to charge ahead in this work of DEI. So without further ado, let's get started. So what we're going to do is a little lightning round of questions. I think you're ready.
Yes.
Practice. So I want you to help frame up for the audience just so we can kind of get to better understand you all and about you. And so you can share any of these things, all of these things. I'll help prompt you if you forget the many things I'm about to throw at you. And so obviously organization overview, real high level. Team size, org size, that would be helpful just for context for some of us who might have comparable size organizations. And then I think what's really interesting is who does your team report to within the organization? And then I have one special one after that.
Wild card.
But yeah, lightning round.
Oh, okay. Hi, I'm with VF Corporation. VF Corporation is the parent company to a bunch of iconic brands. So think North Face, Vans, Timberland, Supreme, Smartwool, Ultra, I'm sure I'm missing some, but lots of outdoor focused brands, and we're based here in Denver, Colorado. We have 35,000 employees and we are in 120 countries. And our DEI team, is that the next one I think? Yep. DEI team is a team of 7 and that's globally based. So we have folks in the APAC region, EMEA region, and the US, Canada region.
Amazing, amazing. And then who does your team report to?
We report into the CPO, so Chief People Officer.
Got it, yep.
Yeah.
Me?
Yes.
Ready? All right, cool. Am I there? Yes. I'm Robert. I use the he, him pronouns. I work at Children's Hospital Colorado. So Children's is the biggest pediatric health system in a 7-state region. 10,000 team members, and that includes our doctors, our contracted folks, our nurses, our admin folk. We have a diversity, health, equity, and inclusion team, so not DEI, but DHEI team that is underneath. We're actually right now in the quality space. We were in human resources and reported to the chief of human resources, but now report to the chief of quality, equity, and outcomes. So I'm the director of the office, and then we have a team of 4 that we work together with. Did I get all those lines?
Yeah, you did. You got them all. And what I love hearing about that reporting up to quality and outcomes is that positions your team well for as you're proving metrics and just the follow through of your work, which is pretty incredible. And so my wildcard question is, do you have an executive sponsor, like as individuals? Do you have someone like that's your champion that's serving as your exec sponsor?
Oh, thanks. I would say for me, our global VP has been a huge asset and support chairperson. For me, previous to Lauren, we had Reggie Miller, who was leading up our program, and he was a great, I think, person to help me realize I could step into this space. I've traditionally come from HR, so hiring, firing, payroll, the really like sexy stuff of HR. And I said, this is a passion area for me. I would love to step into this, but I'm not sure as a straight white woman, is this really a space that I can occupy? And he was just a huge champion for kind of creating space to join the conversation and be a part of that. And Lauren has been a fantastic support in that as well, of just continuing to champion me and champion our work across the org.
And I think what's worth noting is the timing. Can you say circa when you had Reggie as your leader?
Yeah, so I started in 2019. So Reggie and I had about a year and a half together, part of which was COVID, which I feel like is some sort of like unicorn space that doesn't quite count. But was a really transformative time when you're trying to adjust for COVID as a global brand, with retail being one of our key spaces. and nobody's going out, right? So how do we continue to move forward in our DEI at that time work when we don't have consumers coming into stores, they're really only accessing us online? And then how do we support our associates when they're now working from home and fairly isolated, depending especially on their country location, some very, very isolated. Our APAC teams were kind of isolated at home for far longer than the rest of our US teams and EMEA teams. So trying to just navigate that, I think, has been interesting. And then as an org, we are going through a CEO transition, a CPO transition. So I would say lots of change, but we are agile and able to kind of work with what comes our way.
I love that, though. That's a precursor for some other questions we have about how you thread DEI across all those verticals. And so how about you?
So the question, who is an executive sponsor? So there are 6 different chiefs that are trying to be the executive sponsor of our work.
You're so popular.
It sounds like a good thing, right? So we report to the chief of quality, equity, and outcomes. He's a medical doctor, he's been an emergency room doctor for 20-something years, and quality as a pillar of work in hospitals is really broken down into 6 different parts, equity being one of them, so it makes sense. We also have the CEO who's very dedicated to this work, our chief people officer, human resources officer, our chief patient family experiences officer. There are a number of folks that are all vying for a piece of diversity, health, equity, inclusion, because it touches everything that we do. And so no matter what the program is or the effort that the issue that we're dealing with, it lands in their vertical, as it will, and so they're all vying right now to be that sponsor.
It's a good problem to have. I feel like that much buy-in.
You haven't seen my email box. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
All right, maybe not that part.
So it's a challenge in that no one vertical should have it all, right? And at the same time, somebody's got to make the decision. Somebody's got to do the yes or no. So it's a challenge for sure.
Yeah.
It's interesting. It leads me to my next question about scalability, because what I'm hearing you say is you have champions at the highest level who are vested in threading this work throughout the organization. But then the challenge you face is there's only so much of us on the team who can answer the 180 emails sitting in my inbox. And so how have you scaled successfully, right? Like, how have you scaled in a way to look at implementing DEI? And I'd like to just have you start, Robert, since dovetailing off of that.
So I started as a one-person shop. So as I mentioned, I started in human resources, so I was the program manager inside of human resources and only focused on team members, so employee personnel issues. And at the same time, we figured that wasn't enough. We knew with 10,000 employees, it wasn't enough. And so we started thinking about how do we integrate this into our patient care, because the people who are the employees will do the patient care, and if they don't realize equity for themselves, how are they going to do that for our patients? And so we went from my being the only person in 2018 to having now we have a staff of 4. So it's taken this long, and we didn't actually create a department until 2021. And there are a number of reasons. So not only COVID and the murder of George Floyd and the social unrest that it has been since then. But what we found is that, what I was saying earlier, there are a lot of team members of those 10,000 who want to do something, and they're all over. They're in patient-facing roles, they're in food services, they're in HR and tech, IT, and they all needed a place to go. And having one person be able to answer all those emails was not enough, and so we had to continue to build a champion space. So I'm sure there's a question that we'll talk about, that we had to create internal champions in different departments throughout the organization, because it wasn't enough for that one guy in HR to do it.
Yeah, no, I love that. I'd like to ask the question differently for you. So let's go back to what you were saying about how it's evolved since 2019. And so talk about how over the last several years, or since you got started and raised your hand saying, I have a vested interest in this work, how can I be of value?
Yeah.
What have been some of the evolution?
Yeah, I mean, I think when Reggie stood up the org back in 2017, we had tremendous support from our CEO at the time, which was Steve Rendell, which I think we'll certainly get into, but huge, I think, green flag, I would say, when you've got your CEO and your highest level of leadership engaged, not only just saying, yes, I'll fund it. But yes, I'll fund it, I'll participate in it, and I'll support it throughout my teams, right? So that I think was great to see, but it was a team of 2. So to your point, you're like, there's only so many of us and we can only be spread so thin. So you really had to prioritize kind of what was going to be the highest ROI for what you could engage in. And as the team steadily grew, we were able to grow into launching employee resource groups, having councils that have executive level leadership across the business engaged in conversation. We're at a place now where we've got a strategy that's on employees and culture, on brands and consumers, and on society and movement. So really kind of across the board of our own folks, our external facing, and then sort of broadly the communities that we live, work, and play. How do we really participate there in a way that feels meaningful to us? So it's been, I think, a fun evolution, but with each time, I mean, you see the teams grow and shrink as things change, and trying to identify like what are the key pillars you can stick to, and how do you ensure that they stay that way as you grow and shrink depending on business shifts, I would say.
So like keeping really fluid and adaptable, because even sentiment shift. So what worked one year may not fly. You know, an example of like what was once a commitment might now be viewed as just performative, right? So always changing.
Or like that's the baseline, right? Where you felt like as an org you were stepping forward into something, and then now that's the starting point. You actually need to be doing more. So how do you help the group evolve too?
Yeah. And then Robert, specific to you, kind of jumping ahead, fast forwarding, but dovetailing off of what Leah shared. How do you know that you're making an impact in the work? I mean, when I think of patient care and making sure that there's equity across patient care, that's a tremendous responsibility to carry. And so how do you know you're making an impact?
So I have tons of stories, but I have one that I've saved for today, if that's all right. So one of our many programs is called the Black Health Initiative, where Children's Hospital, we recognized many, many years ago that the Black maternal and infant mortality rate in Colorado was higher than for any other demographic cohort. And we don't birth many babies at Children's Hospital Colorado. It's not really our gig, but we wanted to do something because we know that these babies, these premature infants, and their families were coming to Children's Colorado and having these needs. And what we were finding is that it's not because moms aren't doing what they're supposed to do. Not because there's something wrong with being Black and pregnant or Black and a baby, but because there's institutional racism in healthcare, and that's what is killing people. And so this initiative is multi-pronged, but one of the pieces is a simulation series for doctors and community advocates to go into a clinic space, but it's simulated. So we have actors and we even had a simulated mannequin who will give birth. It's the wildest thing you've ever seen. I don't recommend it, but it's wild. And in the simulations, they learn how race shows up in the clinical space, and they're observed by a person like me or one of our team members, and we watch how do their bodies move, what do they say, and they're very polished from residents to fellows and faculty physicians. They know how to do the medicine. But what they've never learned is how to do the people thing, how to have a mutual agenda, how to set a mutual agenda with somebody who's in pain or somebody who's not believed, or all these things. That they're focused on the medicine at the front of it, and so we can talk to them about what else is there. So here's the story. One of our emergency docs who came through the simulation series, she had a really tough time with it. She, in my debriefing with her, I was telling her that just being nice is not enough. Just knowing that person's a Black woman is not enough, that you actually need to engage with what's going on with the institutional racism that's going on. She was knocked down by that idea that her presence as a well-meaning doctor wasn't enough. And she wrote as much in our evaluations. 2 months later, she's in the emergency room and a child presents, a little newborn, like 4-month-old baby comes in distress, and she takes care of that baby. That's her job. But she noticed that the mom was over in the corner wheezing and bent over, not kind of getting sick in the bag. And what she remembered, that Black women have a higher rate of undiagnosed preeclampsia and hypertension that goes undiagnosed. Like, we don't believe our Black women when they're in pain. And so her job is not to pay attention to the mom in the corner, to take care of the baby. She did that. But what she did was, because she remembered that training from the Black Health Initiative, as painful as it was, that we need to pay attention to Black women differently so that they can survive. And not only did that baby survive, but that woman survived. She got her care, so she admitted her to the hospital, got her admitted, so that she could care for her child later on, and their family thrives. She wrote a different email in the evaluation the next time saying, I would not have even thought about that woman had I not had this opportunity to talk about race, to be challenged with my own preconceived notions, and to do something different. So that's what I think about it almost every day.
That teared me up a little bit
I got
because
chills, yeah.
yeah, that's what's so special about this work is it's not trying to make people feel bad for how they show up. It's trying to introduce provide insights of how to connect with people differently, right? Like we don't show up the same. And so if we give each other space and understanding to see the signs of a mother, even though that wasn't her responsibility. And so I'm curious, that one's tough, like I'm still like trying to get it together.
Okay.
But that one's tricky. So how did you apply grace in that debriefing? Mm-hmm. Even still, she was, felt bad that she wasn't excelling in that exercise. But
so we know it's a learning opportunity. So I'm an educator by trade, by passion. That's just that's what my mama did. That's what I do. And so I will challenge with care. You said the word grace. I didn't say she was a villain, right? I didn't say you're a racist or a bigot. None of those things came out of my mouth. And indeed, I know her as a person. She's a very caring woman. She's a great professional. And what I said was, you're here because we need to do more. You've already said you wanted to do more. You want to learn more. And that's what we're going to do. I'm going to challenge you to be better. And better means acknowledging systemic racism and then doing something about it, that we all have that job, and then come back. So I also invited her to come back. I know today was tough. And I didn't know whether she would be saving lives. I mean, I didn't know that was going to happen. But I said, come back, because you'll see that this is important work, and she has. And she is sending people now because she's been able to see the impact that happened with that training.
And she now has a story to tell. The way Lauren opened with the story, I mean, Yeah.
I feel like that's so powerful too, when somebody has that personal connection to tell that story, that it makes the work, I think, easier and blossom better when someone can say, here's the experience I had. I stepped into it this way and I left it completely different, having kind of reflected on it. It just, I think, makes it stronger for that connection.
So Leah, to that point, you talked about ROI. Often we miss the ROI that is in the stories, right? So we're spending a lot of dollars on DEI programming and things of that nature. We were at Pride celebration this weekend, right? Denver Pride, and you can't measure the smile of a kid's face when they see their doctor hospital walking in the parade, right? Or you can't measure that the brand that you have is connecting to somebody's story, and that they decided to get a job at a particular place, or to tell a story to someone else in their community about trusting your brand, because there's no measurable for that.
Yeah.
And that's where the rubber meets the road, if you will.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. I feel like you were listening to my Zoom calls this afternoon. I was literally just having this conversation. I was at the Pride Parade this weekend with Smartwool and a bunch of our other brands, and it's so hard to quantify the goosebumps you get, the tears that come for people who see your brand represented. That they see the value in that, and I think, it seems that I think it was the Edelman Trust report recently was talking about the investment that people are making in businesses. They are now looking at businesses to lead the way. They have less trust in governments, and this is globally, right? Less trust in government. They're looking for businesses to be their focal centerpiece that they can trust and feel like they are really doing good in the world. It's a lot of pressure, but it's also a huge opportunity as a business to step into that and to show up for those consumers, for your community members, for your patients, whatever it may be, to kind of fully come forward into that. But I think for a lot of businesses, it's scary. It can be, I think, worried of cancel culture, worried about, what are people going to say, or are they going to look back at this and reflect and say, you didn't do this, but you do now. And so I think as a leadership team, you have to work through that. We have to own our journey, know where we have been and where we haven't been, and what's our story that we can kind of say we're really proud of, that we're stepping forward into the work, and own where maybe we've missed the mark on things. It's tricky.
And I think when our stories focus or highlight the human element, right, and the needs of the people we're serving, the needs of the people that we're providing service to, and taking that time to listen and let those stories elevate authentically, then it's not as though we're trying to take credit for this result. It's just letting them happen organically and creating the space for it. Absolutely. And so you were talking about like certainly life-saving care, right, from patient care. But then let's talk about the complexity of what this is back to what I was hinting at, the precursor, right? So the complexity of threading DEI across the global footprint that VF has. You've got multiple brands under your umbrella. And then so what you're doing is you're trying to thread that across brands and across cultures. And so talk to us about some of the challenges and maybe some of the successes.
Yeah, I'll give you a much longer answer, but the short version is it's very complicated. We're a highly matrix organization, right? So to your point, we have close to something like 20 brands under our umbrella, right? And each of them was a brand before they were VF. So each of them have created their own culture, their own brand, their own consumer base, right? And then you come under a VF umbrella and it's trying to thread the needle of like, how do we still exist in our space, but also kind of come together as a collaborative group to identify sort of core values. And so we do something that we talk about around globally relevant, but regionally specific. So for our global organizations, what's the global thread that we feel like resonates? And then what is the local activation that feels most specific to them? So a great example right now is Pride, right? So we have folks in EMEA, we have folks in APAC, we have folks in the US and Canada. And in the US, it's a completely different conversation around LGBTQ plus populations than it is in our APAC region. In many of the locations that we have in APAC, it's still illegal. It's still very much a dangerous situation. So how do we support Pride and support the associates that we know are there in that region in a way that is still kind of honoring what's kind of going on in the region itself? And so we have a fantastic teammate, Darshna, who's in that region, and she's that go-to person where we say, hey, this is the way that we're looking to activate for Pride. What does that look like for you? And so for her, in each location, she's saying, okay, in this location, we can go a little bit further on that conversation. In this location, we're actually gonna have to pull that back a lot and really sort of kind of tone the conversation down a little bit because we're gonna lose people. If we go too far, too fast, we lose people and then we cannot get them back. And so it's been a really interesting kind of, I think, like you said, threading the needle of trying to navigate as a corporate entity, how we do that globally, and then how we support brands through that and through their own identity. So we have some brands who have activated for Pride as external consumer-facing things, and we have other brands who haven't. How do we support them either way? Because we know that there are at least associates who identify as a member of that community or allies to that community. I imagine you sort of face a little bit of a similar thing when you have so many different populations you're supporting, right, with different focus areas. I don't know if you have anything that sort of speaks to it too.
I appreciate the volleyball back this way, but I had a question for you.
Oh, no.
How do you Darshna, how does Darshna then talk to those associates in that region about why VF isn't supporting the way that those associates might want them to, or that the way that they see it happening in San Francisco, something like that?
Yeah, it's a great question. Our internal comms will reference the big things and the small things that are happening. And so for Darshna, a lot of it is fed in from our employee resource groups. So they help give a really great temperature check of what's possible in the region and what the appetite is, what they can metabolize in the region. And then I would say some of it is based just on truly legalities of what we can legally do in the region without having police knocking down our door. I just recently heard a story of, I think it was one of the watch companies had all of their rainbow watches pulled out of storefronts by police in that region, right? So how do you figure out how to kind of do that with each of them? But it's very much informed by the employee base. And we do, I think, have some folks who would say, hey, I would like to go a step further. And so for us, it's how do we provide as many resources to support that desire and create connectivity across the globe. So if you, in your region, we just physically can't because of legal issues or whatever it may be, how do we help you feel connected to the bigger activation in another region so that you at least still feel seen and that you have some connectivity to that community? But it's hard. It is really hard because there are also plenty of times when your employee base wants to move faster than the org can move or metabolize, right? So trying to find that balance of pushing while also kind of maintaining that buy-in from sort of all parties. It's a funny dance, I would say.
Are you keeping them connected with access to, Zoom recordings or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so lots and lots of recordings, I would say, on our sites. But I would say uptake is sort of mixed, right? I mean, everybody sits on Zoom all day, and you're kind of like, do I want to sit on another, hour-long thing? I think if it's a really valuable content piece for them, they'll make the time. And we work really hard to bring in speakers and bring in leaders who offer information that people want to hear, right? And that are speaking to something that feels really relevant.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
The complexity of the dance and the communication of it, right? So how do I say, and the children's, what I was talking about this morning was, we're a advocacy organization, we advocate, but we're not an activism organization. And it's hard when you look at the mission of your organization and you're like, yes, I believe that, and I'm gonna go as hard to the wall as I can because of that mission, and then you find out, well, yes, that's the mission, but we're not going to jeopardize everything just to get to that, just to get to there. There are other ways to get to yes. And so it's hard for team members, for associates to learn that their organization is out there, is in support, and at the same time is not going to knock down walls or make things dangerous for the customer base or the patient base, or for the people who are doing the actual work, just because we want to have this message or have this fly this flag or things of that nature. And it's hard because you want your organization to do just that, fly the flag, fight with me alongside.
Yeah.
And that's not as easy as just saying it.
Yeah, I think part of it too is, as a DEI team, hopefully you've got more context to the bigger kind of picture of things, and associates usually kind of know sort of what their workspace might be, and then depending on leadership, they may have a little bit of additional context. But to your point, like, we can see, yes, we want to go 100% on this, but we also know that if we go 100% on this, we may be losing some of these pieces, and we still got to find the balance between those two. And so it's a lot of times trying to be thoughtful about, it's a no right now, but here's where I can support you, here's where I can serve you, these are the policies or procedures we can do to try and make sure that that experience is different if we can't necessarily go and do this other bigger piece right now. So it's always, I think, agility, trying to figure out how you can problem solve for what's kind of thrown your way.
Yeah, it's a precarious pacing. With.
Yeah.
And so let's talk about associates more. We brought up ERGs a few times, and I'd imagine folks in the room have ERGs in their organizations. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about ERGs to help inspire our colleagues who are working with ERGs. And so I'm curious if you could share more about your approach to how you structure your ERGs. I believe you were awarded, and so employee resource groups.
Yeah.
I think you have another phrase for yours.
Yeah, we say team member resource groups because we call our staff team members.
Yes. Yeah. And so talk about it, because I feel like you really helped put those on the map at Children's Hospital and certainly activate them in a way where they've gained some momentum.
So first it takes a village, right? So I said, hey, I'll tell you the story about that in a minute. I'll tell you how that, hey. But so I think it's important, and I appreciate the slide, you gotta really think about what is the resource. Is it the employees are a resource to the organization? The employees are resources to one another. It is a resource to the culture, to the community. It's really important to be thinking about that, because if we don't define what we mean by a resource group, then when we start things like celebrating a culture or a community, and we forget that there's supposed to be a reporting back or an educational opportunity or whatever that is, it needs to be inside of a charter, and everybody needs to understand that. So it's whether it's an employee resource group or a business resource group, we need to know what that is. But what I found when I started at Children's Hospital is that in the cafeteria, all the black nurses would sit together. And all the people speaking Spanish would sit together. And then there was a smattering of white folks, white identifying folks, and just in different places, right? And when I would talk to some of these nurses or some of these individuals, they say, I'm the only of my kind on my floor. I'm the only one. There's nobody like me. But I would know, talk about context, I know there's more black folk in the organization. There's 10,000. So then I would say, hey, Tasha, have you met? Right? Hey, Leah, have you met such and such? And I'm making those. So one day I said, I put on my invite, I just invited a whole bunch of black folk, and I said at the top of the meeting request, black people meet. And that's what it was. It was, I think for 3 months or 4 months in a row, we would just black people meet, and we would just invite people, right? And you bring somebody, I bring somebody. Then I found out that Black People Meet is actually an online dating service.
They're not getting the outcomes they wanted there. They're like, that's not what I showed up for.
Let the community name themselves, whatever the group is called. But that's what it was all about. It was about connecting, and once they started connecting, they started having goals, talking about outcomes. Well, we want to have a Juneteenth celebration. That is our Afrocentric network. It's one of the things. We want to give back to our community. We want to be in the Pride Parade, so that's our LGBTQIA plus focused group is called Spectrum Alliance. But they also changed our bathroom signage. They also, we took gender markers off of name badges. And so these groups are now activating in a way because they have community. Because before they just were alone, were just coming and getting the paycheck and doing their thing. But because they have someone else that they can ride with, being an ally, more than an ally, maybe an accomplice with, now they're little tiny organizations. So we have 7 little tiny organizations inside of our big organization, and each of them has a small budget. And there's a structure for how we celebrate Heritage Month, or how we participate in an outside event, or do an internal event as well.
So charter, freedom to create goals, and kind of drive them forward to the betterment of the business.
I don't know if I would say freedom.
Okay, that's what I'm trying to.
Freedom to create. So yes, a charter, and inside the charter there is what's the purpose of the group, what's the name of the group, what's the purpose of the group, and then our department has 3 goals, so that anyone who's a member is going to connect to the team member experience survey. So everybody's got an engagement survey or a staff survey of some sort. So we want to see resource groups pop up in said survey once a year. That's the goal that we have. More than 25%, or more than 25 members at each monthly meeting, and then 1 educational event a year provided to either internal or externally. So if they meet those 3 goals, whatever else that they're looking for that is within the ability to scope, then we can do that. So are we going to build a building that is specific for this people? We don't have that. The budget's not that big. But can we be in a parade? Can we change the menu in the cafeteria for a particular month? Can we invite, for the first time, we had dragons dancing in the atrium at Children's Hospital because we were celebrating Lunar New Year. Can we do stuff that is educational and promoting the culture? Absolutely.
Love it, love it. Leah, anything more to add about your ERG?
You covered a lot. I've already got notes that I'm asking you about. I think, it's incredibly important, like you said, identifying what their purpose is. VF right now is in sort of an ERG transformation where I think we've started moving from a space of affinity and trying to move towards employee resource groups where we've got these really kind of structured components in that will support the goals that they have and how we can also kind of bring that back to the business. But right now, we've got 20 chapters across the globe. We have a women's, an ACE multicultural group. We have our Pride group and our Veterans group. So I know I'm missing one.
You're off the hook. You do not have to name all 20.
Okay, great. I was like, how much time do we have? But to see those globally activate too is just, I think, really special to see. And so we've been working through, and I have comments to myself to follow up with you on of like, how do you create those guardrails of, because you want to create the freedom for these folks to get together and create an experience that feels valuable to them. But there's also like limits to it of, we can't just say like free reign, do what you want, we still need to stick with strategy. We still need to feel like what they're doing is bringing a good ROI so that we can continue to make the case for them, right? To say this is really valuable, our community of associates really appreciate it, but also this is bringing value to the business. So it's an interesting dance again of guardrails, but also just trying to create the space for them to get together and make it what they want so that it feels like a community and not sort of like another meeting.
Yeah, and I love that, just between the two of you, it's sparking questions that you want to follow up after. And so I hope that we all get to do that with each other at the happy hour, but also when we get to leave and stay connected on LinkedIn, et cetera. And I think one thing I really want to drive home is I loved when you were saying like you use communications to keep people connected where their region might not permit them to actively show solidarity of support, but they can still engage. And that communications piece is so, that's the nature of my business, is helping companies thread that comms piece. And how are you letting your ERGs know what's available and what the ROI looks like so they know what goal they're working toward, right? So keeping them connected to ops and the business objectives.
So a challenge with that is, if we're celebrating Pride, because we keep coming back to that, is the organization celebrating Pride?
Right.
Or is it the ERG, BRG, team member resource group? And it's hard because that group, that community, is a representative of the organization, and yet they're going to be doing something different or maybe saying things differently. So it's not just do we communicate, but are the communications aligned so that if I'm a new team member or if I'm a team member who's not involved, I know that that's a part of the organizational structure, not just a random group that's getting together to do this thing. And that's another piece to thread through that needle.
I agree.
Yeah.
I mean, ultimately, like there's no one size fits all to this, right? And I think that's reassuring, but also like that's where you need your peers. Like, okay, how do I do it this way? Because this is our challenge, but right.
Yeah, I agree.
And so I do want to ask you all, what has been the best strategy you have found for integrating DEI beyond just your teams?
I feel like I just keep going back to this thread the needle piece. It's a common theme, but for us, it's threading it across the biz, right? So like, you don't want your DEI team, ours is IDEA, Team Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Action. We cannot be the only owners of this work. If we are, this will live and die with us. So you have to ensure you've got that buy-in at many levels, you've got champions at many levels, but then how do you build it into business process, right? So for us, we've been really working through like HR processes. That is often some of the first time someone engages with your organization. Can you imagine if someone comes in and it's like immediately like, that didn't feel right, I don't feel connected, or you didn't really see me for me. It's a terrible start, and you've got to like, then you're kind of like digging from underground trying to get ahead. And so trying to ensure that the processes have those things in mind, that those teams understand where that bias comes in, where they may be showing up unintentionally or ideally not intentionally, but like educate people on how to show up and be supportive to those folks as they come into the organization. And then ownership, ensuring that like, not only are you putting it in front of them, but like, how do you own it now? How do you make it yours? So for our brands, how do we help support them, make it something that they can call their own? And it's not a DEI or IDEA initiative that they're activating. It's something that they are owning. They say, yep, we created it. We've done it in partnership, but we've created it, we own it, and it feels brand right, it feels team right, and it feels like something we can actually create momentum after, versus sort of like the singular, our team says you should do this, ready, go. Yeah. It's just a lot slower that way, and not, I feel like, as vibrant of an experience to do it that way.
Yeah, no, I agree. Thank you.
Yeah.
My dream is that we don't need DEI offices at some point, right? And not tomorrow. Don't go back to your jobs and your places and go say, Robert said. But like, if you think about what you're talking about, what if everybody had in their job responsibilities to have a lens on equity and inclusion, period? That the standards of behavior that we are evaluating on every year are connected to, did you look through this lens? And if so, great, here's the raise or benefit. Or if not, you got work to do. What if everybody did that, from the CEO to everybody, right? Because then you'd have subject matter experts. So your HR subject matter experts are going to say to the hiring manager, you need to be recruiting in a certain way because I have this equity lens and this inclusion lens, and you need to do that. I'm the subject matter expert. And then the hiring manager goes, I need you to help me recruit in a particular way, and so I need you to be out there looking for these folks that aren't represented in our organization, and everybody's doing it. The CEO is helping the board look for people from all over the community that look different and move different and aren't the same all the time. Like, everybody's job. We're not there yet.
Yeah.
And so what I think is a next step is to make sure that everybody who wants to be a part of that community, who wants to be a part of that work, has the opportunity. So I may not have DEI in my job title, but how do I get on? How do I start practicing and playing in that space? Can I make it a part of a development goal that I have in my performance review, or is there something I can do beyond maybe being in the ERG? How can I do this work if you're my leader? Letting me know after you read that book, how can you apply it? Or you went to see that movie, how can you share it in the team meeting, so on and so forth. So that then we build a community of informed community members who want to work against oppression and systemic exclusion, and they can do that from whatever space they are and empower them that way.
Yeah, we I think it was last year, implemented, we have what are called our people leadership expectations. And one of those core expectations is around inclusion and diversity. And so everyone who is a people manager and up has to have a goal as a part of their goal, and there are 3 to 5 goals. So it takes a good chunk of it to make sure that you have at least one goal that speaks to this. And the higher you go up, the more compensation is attached to it, right? So if you are not achieving those goals, you're gonna feel it. And so really ensuring that folks not only talk the talk, but walk the walk, and that we have accountability metrics in place to kind of go, hey, how can we support you in doing this next time? What are the things that are missing, or how can we help you kind of get past that a little bit? So excited to see the turnout of that.
And are you guiding the leaders in what they identify as their goal, or do they get to say, well, this resonates with me, and so this is what I'm incorporating into my...
Yeah, so it's a little bit of both.
Okay.
So there's, in the people leadership expectations, we have, it's kind of this like matrix of this is what it looks like, basically. So at different levels in the organization, here's how you power that at your level in sort of the opportunity you have. And so they can kind of plug into those, but then there's also examples when you go in to do your review of here are 4 to 5 ways that you could plug in. And we know naturally there will be people who just pick one of the 5 that they see. So we've made sure they're good ones that we feel good about, right? But they do have an opportunity to kind of input something of their own, but it still goes through managers and leaders, so there's some accountability there, I would say.
Sure, which accountability is helpful, and just kind of having this awareness of here's how I can help drive this. One of the things I've talked about with other clients has been, you've got 3 different approaches to this journey, right? No one's on the same DEI journey. And so you might be on your individual journey, and what does that look like? Is it, that you have chosen that I'm going to enhance my learning, or I'm going to watch these movies, or I'm going to have more conversations, et cetera. And then is there like this, leadership kind of vertical of, what can I do within my department? Do I have the capacity to help be really conscious of hiring? That's within my purview. I'm going to be more conscious about hiring, or I'm going to make sure my team feels like this sense of belonging, and then I'm kind of manage up a little bit and make sure my executives see how well my team is performing, or highlight the contributions of members of my team. And then I also talk about like legacy, where if you have this vast network of access to resources, getting people connected to opportunities, helping them advance executive sponsorship, right? Then how can you, with a person with this legacy of influence, help drive that work? And so it reminds me of what you're talking about with your matrix within the org.
Yeah, we in 2021 we launched our care community, and that put forward some really strong goals around care commitments. And one of those is really focused on our leaders needing to engage in mentorship with underrepresented communities. And so that's one of those, when you talk about legacy, like, how do we ensure that you're out of your own bubble, basically? How do you create and expand this legacy of work beyond your own sort of initial bubble? And so investing in organizations and people outside of VF to keep that connectivity and start building those ideas again. So I love what you're saying.
Yeah, and it's not one size fits all. You get to customize it according to your journey.
Yeah.
Can you talk about, Robert, kind of dovetailing off of this somewhat, like that notion of threading the needle, integrating the work, connections to mission and values?
Yeah, I would say you don't have to add DEI work if you just look at your mission. And when I go, so at Children's I do this a little bit, but is my time up already?
Is that, are we done, Jess?
Are we okay? Okay, all right. When I tell groups and organizations, CEOs and boards and things, when I go and consult with them, I say, because they're looking to add a DEI statement or equity statement or something like that, say, look at your mission. How do you achieve that mission or that goal, those goals, without looking at equity, without having equity as a mindset, without having inclusion as a mindset? How do you do that? And the converse is true. Like, if you do focus on that, your goals will be met, but you're going to make more money if that's what you're looking for. You're going to have more reach if that's what you're looking for. Your impact is going to change because you're focused on that. Like, there are so many opportunities we have as organizations to just do what we normally do, and the profit margins are still great. People are still happy, and then if we start looking at the Great Resignation, as it was called, we start to learn that people didn't feel like they belonged because they weren't being able to be authentic to themselves. So really, we're not meeting our mission. We're not meeting our values. One of the organizations here in the neighborhood that we're working with right here, they have a value of integrity. And so we were talking about, is this DEI thing really even necessary? Do we even have a problem? And so when we look at their HR metrics about who in the organization is at the top of the organization, who's not, I ask, is it to your value of integrity to know that the top levels of your organization don't represent the community or the bottom levels, if you will, of the organization? Is that integrity? Is that integritus? And the answer is no. And we know that. Intrinsically, we know that, but sometimes we need a consultant or somebody or DEI person to say, we're not living up to our values because we're missing on equity, we're missing on inclusion in the ways that they're being defined globally.
And then I'm curious, thank you for that. And I'm curious, Leah, if you could segue to like outcomes around talent and strategy, measurement, tracking, et cetera. I mean, so I know you shared with us about the metrics with the leadership.
Yeah, so we're fortunate in that we've got Lauren, our executive vice president, also is over TD, so our talent development team, and that was just sort of like an org shift that has happened very nicely for us, in that we get to influence a lot of what our talent development team does. And so the talent development team, I think, has really invested in how do we invest in talent that we have not been, or that we have not seen outcomes from, not because they're not good at it, but we just have not like built the system to support them. And so we've been thinking a lot around, when you've built systems to support these communities who have not traditionally been represented, what are all the extra pieces, right? So who are the leaders that need to engage? Who are the other outside organizations you need to engage? Who are the different people that you can pull in to create the best possible resources for that team to be successful? And so we've been looking a lot through kind of our training modules. So we have an kind of idea learning journey that we've worked through, and how are we seeing people kind of uptake on that? Are we seeing a lull? Why are we seeing a lull? Do we need to refresh content? We have a whole another can of worms with retail populations, distribution centers. Those populations don't have access to computers in their kind of regular time that our office-based folks do. So how do we disproportionately invest in that population, because that's actually one of our most diverse populations, and they're not getting access to all the material. So really trying to build towards that so that it's still kind of continuing to move, but I would say it's a work in progress.
Well, and then how critical are partnerships in helping you make those improvements?
Yeah, one of them, I'll try and be really quick on this one, but we have a partnership with someone called Pencil Lewis College of Business and Design, and they help us create an apprentice program that invests disproportionately into BIPOC communities who are design talent. So we did one previously that was on footwear design, and that talent, what it did for us was it helped leaders recognize we can have people fresh out of school that are bringing value immediately. We had sort of this thing going where you need to have 3 to 5 years, and they suddenly thought, oh my gosh, these people are hugely talented. This is not what I thought. So it was shifting mindsets around hiring, but it was also building a new pipeline for us of design talent that we weren't seeing previously, and then connecting partners to them. So we have other partners through our foundation that we work with that are in similar spaces but not doing the same work. So now we've connected them, and I just recently had this like starburst moment where they all connected and were like, oh, we can feed our programs into your programs and yours can go here. And it was like, this is it. This is like, you're utilizing and leveraging each other's resources to continue to build on the talent pipeline that you've each been individually.
And drive innovation for the business. I mean, that right there.
Yes, and all 4 of those students got hired, and all 4 of them now have products that are out in the world on the shelf, and they're like, in their 20s, you know, how about calling mom and dad and saying like, hey, look, I made that shoe. I got to create that innovative new shoe that's selling on our website, in our stores. It's amazing to see, and people love them. They're like mini celebrities, I feel like.
I love it, and that's not DEI being mandated. It's being inclusive and bringing these, you know, I wrote that shifting mindsets around hiring, and then this beautiful discovery of that led to innovation. It's really cool. Robert, do you want to add to that at all?
No, that was great.
I know. Isn't that kind of, we told you you have a mic drop. You had your mic drop. Well, then, how about just one last question? And my last question for you, you know, it's when you're in this work and you have some successes, you have some challenges. I think what I always find really deeply meaningful is what are the lessons learned? What do we learn from it? And so, if you have one that's at the top, like front of your brain, that you'd like to share with the group, I'd love to hear.
You have one ready?
I'm molding it.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think, and this is one we're still working through, I would say, is our distribution centers and retail populations, really just like frontline staff, folks who don't have the regular access to communications that we've traditionally done, we've had to just like completely rethink, how do we make this information accessible to them? How do we help them feel engaged, especially when they're hourly? And it's a little bit easier when you have folks who aren't hourly, they can kind of plug in, join a webinar here and there, and it's a lot easier. When you have folks that are hourly, you've really got to account for all of those minutes, and especially if they're on the floor, you're pulling someone off the, you know, the sales floor to do that. And so that's been one that, for the 4 years I've been with VF, we've been trying to kind of crack the code and shape, and I think we're getting somewhere really close with our distribution centers that is meeting them where they're at with the resources they have in a way that feels meaningful to them. But it's not been pretty, I would say. We've been trying, and it's lots of, honestly, feedback, lots and lots of feedback, and not always the feedback you want to hear. But it helps shape and mold the new experience.
And I'd imagine there's a reception to the fact that you're trying.
Yeah.
Because you're constantly communicating out the effort
Yeah,
you're making.
for sure.
Did we give you?
Yes, that was great. One thing I might add to that is just start measuring the impact to their effectiveness after an intervention. So they had a class, or they watched a video, then what?
Yep.
Did sales go up, or did they get faster, or whatever, or not, right? And start thinking about that, because then you might have impact that you can share. This is why we pulled them off the floor, because they're going to be better when they go back, or they're going to reach a demographic that they wouldn't have otherwise, because they're connecting differently. So I might add that.
That's good.
Work as hard as you can to keep your DEI group and your HR group from being adversaries. It's very easy for those who are fighting against oppression to be fighting inside the walls of human resources. Because the human resources team is looking to mitigate risk, they're looking to not have a bunch of conflict going on, and fighting oppression, fighting systems can be very conflictual, can be very hard, and the two things don't always go together. So whatever you can do to keep them together, to make sure that they're on the same page and that they're using the same language, try. It's not easy, and there are the dividends that pays later, especially in employee relations. If you're whoever your employee relations person has a lens on DEI and they don't have to have them in the room, that's great, because then your team, your associates know that they're being seen by the people who are there supposed to support them, versus the DEI folk. And I'm always going to run to the DEI people because they get me and those other people don't. So that's what I'm saying.
I love that. And so I think my takeaway from all of this is that at the end of the day, this work really helps to enhance culture, especially when you just continue staying the course. And I'm still struck by, Lauren, what you said about when you sat in that room at Ball Corp and you saw the representation that gave you just kind of like put you at ease. You didn't have to prove yourself. And that story, think about every marginalized group, when they have that representation, it gives that sense of, I don't have to fill in the blank.
And like, how much better are you at your job when you're not masking something, right? And you're not like,
when you get to be your authentic self, like
you
said it, the great resignation, right? Was people didn't feel this sense of belonging. And so when you think about, you know, the scaling back budgets for DEI, et cetera, I think about how, remember, like, we invest in culture, and DEI helps enhance culture. That work is very additive to belonging and having people know that they have a place to belong and to add value to the bottom line. And so I just feel like, you know, I think it was Paula and I were talking about how this isn't going away. People wanting to feel like they have a place in their workplace is not going away. And so, so the imperative for change isn't going away either. And I think my takeaway is that, you know, how are you integrating this into your workflow? You know, when you're onboarding, how do people know that they belong from the moment that they show up to get all their materials and throughout the rest of that process? And then how is it part of your core business in terms of processes and practices? And you shared that with us, right, around goal setting and, you know, what partnerships can look like. And ultimately, how are you communicating it out again and again so there's clarity about the importance of the work? Thank you so much for your time, for taking the time to listen. Thank you for taking your time to be here with us. I'd imagine there's some questions and wrap up. And turn it to Lauren or Jess.
We can do questions.
Is that cool? Okay.
Go for it.
All right. So, yes, can you say your name and who
Yeah,
you?
absolutely. Lori Frazier, Chief People Officer with Pax8. We're a billion-dollar high-tech startup headquartered in the tech center, but we're global. I actually just this week listened to Lauren on a podcast, and I was just so intrigued by so much of the exciting work that's going on at VF. And I guess one of the things that really intrigued me was this idea of the councils that you guys have put in place, and we are really early in our journey here. Our leadership is happy to write checks, but we're actually looking at rebranding DEI into IDEA, but the A standing for allyship, because what they don't, it's a high-tech, founder-led startup, and our clients are founder-led startup MSPs. It's very, very white male heavy. People get that, that something needs to change, but they don't understand their role. So I was just really intrigued by the idea of councils. And when do you start? Are they part of setting the strategy? Do you set the strategy and then pull them in? I mean, how do you build that?
Yeah.
So just for for the recording, just the question was around the employee resource groups, right?
No,
or the
this is
councils?
different from the councils.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So the
so
councils
when
for
you-
VF, okay.
Yeah.
So the councils, and then how you employ them in driving the work forward.
Yeah, so when do you start a council? Why do you start a council? So we first started councils in 2017 when we launched and stood up our business, and that really, our DEI function, that helped kind of, I think, temperature check with our executive leadership team of here's what the strategy we've set. Get some feedback. They're not necessarily always going to, kind of take it one direction or other, but they're able to inform what else is happening in the business that we should be aware of and how we can connect our work to key outcomes they're looking for. So I think that was really important for us. We've had an evolution of councils and over time. Now we have what's called the GIDC, which is our Global Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity Council. And that council really has served with our executive leadership team engaged. It keeps them regularly engaged in the conversation, which is great. It carves out time with them to have that conversation because schedules get full and I feel like you have to book those things out months in advance. So this helps hold that time with them. And it gives us a chance let's say when something comes up that was unexpected, let's say we're waiting on Supreme Court rulings here this week, right? When something comes out, we have that council on the books already to be able to have that conversation with leaders in the room. And then we have worked with our councils to have them also be informed by associates. So it's not just going to be a top-down experience, but how do we have ERGs engaged? How do we have associates that are sort of more in that middle area participate in setting the agenda for what that looks like? And so I'd say it's a collaborative process for sure. And they have been really helpful for us at sort of checking on where our strategy is going. Does this feel right? Is there anything we haven't really kind of thought of in terms of your view of the business, wherever they sit in the business?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great question.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes.
Hi, Jan Matheson, Global Citizen. I have a question. I'm going to start with one, but it's for both of you guys. So within your employee resource groups, do you have this group and this group and this group?
Mm-hmm.
How are you ensuring equity amongst those groups and how they feel that this group isn't getting more attention than this group? And I'm just wondering how you guys are going about that for both of you guys.
Yeah, I'll keep it short because I feel like you've got even more to say here. But for us, it's a ongoing process. I think it's very much dependent on executive sponsors. So, and I'm sorry, I should repeat the question. So how do you make sure there's equity across employee resource groups? And for us, it's quite dependent on executive sponsorship and just where they sit in the business. So we have some that sit at brand locations. We have some that sit with the center and are attached more to a location that's not branded. And so executive sponsors will be huge advocates for it, and that can be really helpful. But if you have an executive sponsor who's not engaging, that's a signal for us of, hey, we've got to shift something here because we need executive sponsors that are going to be constantly engaged in supporting the work and helping to fund and amplify the work. So it's imperfect, I would say, but it's something we do keep top of mind to try and ensure that we also don't run into, well, that one was established longer ago, how come they get more access or something? So trying to ensure that that doesn't happen just because they have existed for longer. But they also learn from experience, so sometimes they execute more easily because they've done it before. Yeah, but I
I think what I'd add is that equity is not equal. right? And so we have a limited amount of funds that we can provide to however many resource groups we have. So we put that number, and we say that each group gets $1,500, let's say, right? But in our team, we know that parades cost more, right? Or that a particular speaker we really want to hear that one resource group really wants to have, but everybody's going to benefit from. We're not going to penalize that particular resource group just because they want to do that one thing with that one person or that one speaker. So what we say is equity is not equal. What we're paying attention to is the impact of said resource group and the reason that we have it in the first place. So when you asked about how do we develop them, we started with, I started with Black People Meet because of that need that I was happening with my colleagues. But what we're looking at is the differences that impact one's experience. So one's racial identity, one's gender identity, their faith-based identity, their veteran status and their ability status, their neurodiversity status. Those are the, did I name that? Was it 7? Almost. And language. Those are the ways that we are creating these resource groups. And so not every resource group has the same need, and so they're not going to have the same things that are going on. Yeah. We do have access to internal and external communication. We do have access to the cafe to do a special menu, but not everybody's going to get everything that the other group got, no matter how long they've been around, because it's different groups have different needs.
Yeah. Yes, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Lori Fisher. I'm CEO of Ready or Not Media, and we disrupt corporations to be more disability inclusive. So I would love to know what your agendas are around accessibility, and you talked about briefly about access, which is certainly something of covering as a subject matter in the workforce. So I'd love to hear what you're doing.
Repeat the question.
So what is our agenda around accessibility?
Yeah.
So as a hospital, you might think, oh, we've got all that figured out, and we don't. We certainly don't.
That's why I thought
and so it's really, so would you say it's imperfect? Is that the last question? I would almost say we don't have a plan, right, or strategy. I will say we don't have a strategy, and here's why. Because we know the ADA exists, the American Disabilities Act exists, and so then we'll march right up to the ADA when there's a question about an accommodation. But you know what we won't do, or we have trouble with, is adding captions to every video that we put out, every training video. And we have a challenge with that because there's not enough of us that are thinking about, and again, back to inclusion, right? We're not thinking about who we need to consider when we're developing whatever the thing is, the training, the video, the doorway that we're putting together, all these things. So when you ask about what's the agenda, there's no plan. What we are committed to, though, what we're committed to, and I think this is the hallmark of our organization, and not just our DEI work, but just as the organization, we're a learning organization. And so one of our values is humble expertise. So when a team member says that, I can't read that on the screen because of the contrast and the way that my site works, we don't go, sorry. We go, how do we fix that? What is it that we can do to adjust rather than be defensive or say that it can't be done or that it's too expensive? We work to get to yes. Can we put, there's a microphone system that sits in your floor for folks that have Bluetooth is connected to their assistive hearing technology. That's really expensive to tear up a floor and put that in. But we do have other ways to connect to that technology, and so figuring that out. So this is not an answer to your question so far as, and what we do have is an open space where people can say, I need this, beyond the HR accommodation space, and we're open to that and making moves because of that.
Yeah, that's great.
Yes,
Yeah, I would say we're in a similar space of we're working on it. We have an incredible partner called Disability In. They have been fantastic in helping support us through building that strategy. We've been working with their Inclusion Works program, which if you don't, they're wonderful. Inclusion Works membership gives you 100% free consulting for as much as you need. And it's been a fantastic resource for us as we look at brands who are trying to work through capsules perhaps. So like JanSport just put out a backpack and bag system that works for mobility devices. That was 3 years in the making, and it was something where we really had to listen and learn of, are we doing this stuff inside? Do we have supports inside before we go putting something out externally? Are we training folks on this? So we're building, I would say, and it's one that is certainly top of mind as we continue to kind of try and expand the strategy. Yeah.
Great question.
Oh, did you raise your hand earlier? Yeah, go ahead.
Two
Yeah.
comments. The first thing I was going to say is I'd be really careful removing access from our thought processes around diversity, equity, and inclusion. I thought I heard somebody mention that they were talking about starting an idea council and replacing the access with ally, which is awesome, but it also is a little exclusionary. That can be problematic. And I say that not just because we want to include disabled people as a general demographic, but because every human being encounters some form of disability throughout their lifespan. And so if you are not cognitive of that, you're not just excluding people who live with disabilities every day, but you're excluding humans who will potentially be living with disabilities in their futures.
Sure.
And the other thing that I wanted to say is that one of the things that we do, or that I require of our ERGs at the company I work for, is I require them to meet quarterly. So to help prevent issues of equity, for instance, or issues of one ERG feeling like another ERG is getting more, and also to kind of engage with intersectionality and to really get them to think about the way that their needs intertwine.
Yeah.
Just a couple of like food for thought items.
That's why we're here, though, to be able to share and cross-share. And now can you say your name?
Gabby Payne.
And the company?
I work for Premier Members Credit Union.
Perfect. So now we know to connect with you.
Yes.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Gabby.
Absolutely.
That's great.
Liz?
Yeah, hi, Liz Gardner, brand new with DaVita. And I would just be curious, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the intersectionality and partnership. Many of us are in more of the corporate philanthropy space, and sort of how you move in partnership, an inclusion and diversity strategy, and a corporate philanthropy strategy.
Yeah, okay. So I work very closely with our executive director, Gloria Schock, who is the head of the Yes Foundation. And we meet probably every other week, honestly, talking through what are the grantees that they're working with, what is sort of the up and coming list that they're looking to connect with, and how can we help support them. They're a team of 2. So I also support through, as we generate relationships that our team is very much invested in the success of, I then help manage that relationship too, so that we can make sure that they've got multiple folks really cheering for them across the business. I would say other things are just, for us, it often kind of goes between our philanthropy team, our ESG team, which is a lot of times like our sustainability folks, and then our idea team. There's a lot of that gets kind of interconnected, particularly as we've seen there'll be new stuff coming out from the EU around ESG reporting that is likely to include inclusion and diversity work, and lots more reporting on that they expect the US to follow with. So how do you keep up and how do you get ahead of it? I think is so important to work with your giving partners for that. And even if you don't necessarily have like a foundation arm, connecting with your community is going to be so powerful in terms of how you activate internally, right? So I would say work closely, very closely with those partners, but it's an open dialogue for us constantly.
One of the challenges I think that we're all gonna continue to run into for those of us who have philanthropic needs is the old money and new money, right? That old money that we've been depending on, that we already had planned for, is around, and we like it, and we don't want to get rid of it because then we don't know what the things are uncertain. Yeah. New money, though, is tracking the same way that our new generations are coming into the workforce, that there's new expectations, that there's a new interest in impact with my dollars, and I want to know every dollar where it's going and what's going to be done with it. And I have a social impact interest now that old money hasn't had traditionally, right? Mm-hmm. So if you don't already have someone in your corporate philanthropy space who's tracking who is and who isn't representative of that old money and the new money, you're going to run into a problem when those partners that you had at one point change their minds, and they're looking at you because you haven't changed with the times, because they're going to get that same pressure because of social, because of community changes. Mm-hmm. And so if you're not tracking and trending that, and I know with a group of 2, it's really hard to do, but if you're not watching that, then you're going to end up without those funds, old or new, because you haven't followed that trend.
Mm-hmm.
No, I appreciate that. So that's it for questions, and I thank you all for being so engaged. And so I have one CTA for you, is when Be Civic posts a follow-up about today on the LinkedIn. When they post on LinkedIn, I invite you all, if you had any thoughts or any sentiment about this conversation or a contribution that you'd like to add the way Gabby did, which was so helpful, please engage in that post. I can't wait to see 25 posts, 25 comments, or just many likes. And then it'll be fun for us to all start to be able to follow each other and like each other that way. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for being here. This was so wonderful to hear from.
Thanks for having us.
Should we walk up the stage?
Well, I don't think this mic works. So,
Right on top.
fantastic. Well, thank you all so much for being here. I think I'm comfortable saying this on behalf of everyone. That was insightful, engaging, impactful, and I think all of us are leaving here with about 15 other things that we would like to touch base with you all as well as each other on and keep the learning going. As a reminder, Be Civic, as mentioned, will send out a recap of the event, so keep an eye out for that email. If you'd like to get more involved with Be Civic and maybe one day end up here very nervous like I am and talk to a bunch of people, feel free to reach out to Jess or Olivia. There are also ways to become a member investor. There are a lot of opportunities, so I definitely encourage that. I want to thank you all for coming and ask for one last round of applause for our panelists as well as
It was so fun. You guys were awesome. Great answers.
and hopefully you can all stay for the happy hour. It is upstairs. There will be a few people from Be Civic helping direct, but it's just down the hall up the stairs. And keep the conversation going. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks.